Hey, what's up, everybody? It is Miss Gooding, and I'm here to talk about the early years of the Cold War. Specifically, I'm going to spend some time on the Iron Curtain speech, the Truman Doctrine, and the Marshall Plan specifically. So, before we get there, though, I want to review a little bit about what was going on right after World War II. So, as we all know, the Allied countries won the war, World War II. And so these dominant countries that kind of came out of World War II were the United States of America, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain. We know that Europe was in ruins. Communism was on the rise because the USSR was very, very strong. And so this set up competition and, to be honest, animosity eventually between the United States of America and the USSR. So on the right-hand side of your screen right now, you have a comparison chart between capitalism and communism. I'm going to briefly go over this so that we are all on the same page with these two kind of political philosophies. So capitalism, if a country is capitalist, they believe in free elections, multiple political parties, a laissez-faire approach to government, private ownership of land and businesses is seen as a good thing, competition, especially in business, different social classes, so usually an upper class, middle, and lower class. Freedom of speech is very valued, and usually in a capitalist society, there's a higher productivity rate and a greater standard of living. In comparison, communism is one part state, and business and land are owned by the government, and the government makes decisions about what kinds of businesses, what the land is for, etc. There's really no competition between businesses because government is making those decisions for them. There are no social classes, and if so, it's very, very minimal differences. The government controls the lives of citizens. They do use a lot of censorship. Um, Communism was created in reaction to capitalism, and oftentimes communism results in low productivity, shortages, and a lower standard of living in comparison to capitalism. All right, so let's get to the Iron Curtain speech. The Iron Curtain speech was given by Winston Churchill, who was the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, and he gave this speech in the United States of America on March 5th of 1946. And essentially, what he talks about in this speech is the fact that there is a group of countries in the eastern part of Europe that are falling into communism, and the western part of Europe is mostly democratic and capitalist. And so on this map, you can see a red line that kind of divides these countries. And this red line, of course, it's a metaphor, the Iron Curtain, but the red line is the Iron Curtain that separates these more communist countries, okay, and ruled by the USSR, so Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, from the western part. And so the western countries in Europe were West Germany, Austria, Italy, France, Belgium, etc. Okay. And so this Iron Curtain speech really kind of created the idea that there is a massive delineation in Europe between communist and capitalist countries. So this definitely starts the wheels in motion, okay? And before we get to the Truman Doctrine, I want to talk about George Kennan. There was something called Kennan's Long Telegram that was sent by a man named George Kennan, who is an American diplomat in Moscow, that he sent this telegram to President Truman on February 22nd, 1947. And in this telegram, he basically says that Stalin cannot be trusted not to spread communism, and that the USSR must be contained or communism will spread. And when President Truman read this telegram, he agreed. And he agreed with Kennan's assertion that, the USSR cannot be trusted and that communism will spread unless it is contained. And so containment is a really important concept. Containment is keeping communism contained to a very local area. so that it didn't bleed into other countries, especially after World War II, when a lot of the countries, especially in France and Germany, they were devastated. And Truman knew that a lot of times communism really thrives when there's poverty. And so a lot of these countries were struggling after World War II economically. And in order to build up their cities, it was really, really hard. And so Truman wanted to make sure that he contained communism and created the Truman Doctrine in response to his fear that communism would spread. And so essentially, the Truman Plan, it was communicated on March 12th of 1947, and it was a significant American foreign policy approach to Europe. And what it did is it promised economic aid to any country trying to remain free from communism, specifically countries in Europe, Western Europe specifically. Okay? And of course, if they were aided economically, they would have a better chance, the United States would have a better chance of containing communism. All right, so how do we pay for that? This is where the Marshall Plan comes in. So George Marshall was the U.S. Secretary of State, and he traveled around Europe right after World War II, and he noticed um, how desperate some of these countries were. They had been bombed. They had been really disseminated by World War II, and so he proposed an aid package. He approached Congress. Congress kind of was really up in arms at first because this aid package was $13 billion over 4 years. But essentially, this Marshall Plan would guarantee these countries that if they were to avoid communism and also agree to trade with the United States of America, they would then be aided economically in order to rebuild their countries and avoid communism. So this benefited the United States in quite a few different ways. Number one, it increased their trade partners. Number two, it contained communism. And number three, it really, really helped build up the reputation of the United States of America as a leader and as a benefactor to a lot of these countries that were devastated after World War II. So these maps here are to kind of show you a little bit about which countries benefited from the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan really ended in 1950, but it really did help a lot of these countries. This is an interesting picture. On the left-hand side is a picture of Stuttgart, Germany before it received the Marshall Plan aid, and in 1955 after. And you can see how much money this probably the money actually helped this particular city. Another interesting thing that happened in the very beginning of the Cold War was the creation of NATO. And NATO it stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its specific purpose was to safeguard the security and freedom of all of its members by political and military means. And so you can see that in the light green, these are all the countries that joined NATO, and they basically had each other's backs. Well, the Warsaw Pact of 1955 was created really as the counterbalance to the NATO treaty. And it really was the Soviet Union's attempt to create that same sort of community. And so the Iron Curtain, per se, that split Western from Eastern Europe, really now kind of became a global idea.